It's obvious why you're all here, because you believe something in common, which is that if you build a data-driven organization, you're going to win, right? So there's this understanding that actually making data-driven decisions is a competitive advantage. We know this because we have lots and lots of the best companies in tech using our software and being data-driven throughout the organization. I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about some observations about how they use data and how it works. So if you've got if you took a test in school and you got a B on a test, it doesn't give you a whole lot of information, right? It gives the teacher a bunch of information to be able to compare students, but it doesn't give you a whole bunch of information about what to do better. So a grade is a poor choice for building a data-driven organization. And we're going to talk a little bit about what makes a good data-driven organization. What do you want to happen, and how do you measure that so that you can actually make actionable decisions? The other thing that I've noticed in data-driven organizations is that the entire organization thinks data. It starts at the top, but goes down to everybody who is doing any job, has access to data, good data, and can actually take action from what they're seeing. And we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about how you get an organization to do that. Operational control is a pattern in which you can dig into data and understand it, and we're going to talk about that. And you have to recognize that this is a journey, that you won't get there, and you won't just install some software and this will happen. So you have to actually, you actually have to build something. So let's start with what success looks like for a business. If you think about any given business, you can think about what would make it successful. So a classic way of measuring newspapers or websites is page views. But that only lets you compare whether one organization is better than the other. If one has more page views, then it might have more readers, but it doesn't tell you what people are reading or the depth with which they're reading. So Daniel came up with this great measure, which was attention minutes. How many minutes do they spend reading a particular article? That's a good measure. Looking at, depending on what you measure, really matters a lot. If you're VC-backed, you'll probably get asked a bunch of KPIs. So we're a SaaS company, so we measure CAC, and we measure churn, and we measure a bunch of things that aren't necessarily actionable. So Uber, their board might want them to measure monthly active users are going up. That's a good thing. But it doesn't tell you how to do anything about how to make monthly active users go up. It just tells the board that tells you whether you're winning or losing, just like your grade. But if you want to make Uber's service better, then you might care about, somebody who gets a quick pickup is going to want to use the service more, and the faster the car comes every time that they come, the more likely they are to use the service. If I have to wait 10 minutes, well, then maybe I won't want to use the service. But if I have to wait less than some number of seconds, then you can figure out whether or not they're having a good experience. So a real measure would be seconds until pickup. Facebook, again, daily active users, how many people are using it? 3/4 of the world is using Facebook. Doesn't tell you how to run Facebook any better, but the number of minutes that they spend looking at it will tell you whether or not that the change that you made to the site is actually giving them more of what they're interested in. Total orders is another thing. It's just a measure of success, whereas if I'm ordering from Amazon, I want to get it in 2 days because I bought Prime and it should deliver it in 2 days, right? So figuring out what you want to happen and then figuring out a way to measure that is really key. It's the first step in becoming data-driven. Don't worry about what everybody told you to measure. Measure what you know will help you be successful. Figure out what you want to happen and then look for proxies for that will make you successful. I'm going to tell you a sad story. I was on the board. There was a company that I was working with that started at the exact moment Slack started. I mean, that must have been weeks, right? And if you looked at their UIs and I took the labels off, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the software. They looked really similar. But the company that I was working with had an investor who was saying, it's all about daily active users. We have to get daily active users. And the viral loop is super important. And you need to actually figure out how to get new people to come in. And then they can get more people to come in and you can build your daily active users. And so being an entrepreneur, this guy just focused on daily active users, and he figured out how to use Facebook to spam your friends to get other people to come do it and to try it. And sure enough, daily active users was on an insane ramp. And then they asked me to look at it, and I'm like, you're in trouble. Like, what's happened? And he's like, no, we're winning because daily active users is good. And so, okay, so if you stop and you think about Slack and what do you want to have happen? Well, you want communities of people who are going to be using the product, right? You want daily active, maybe you want daily active groups of people using it, not just individuals. And so what had happened was that they were losing people as fast as they were gaining them. So they had their daily active users was on a ramp, but they were churning so fast that in 6 months they weren't anywhere. And so they're out of business. So over-focusing on the wrong measure can kill you. And especially if so you've got to figure out what you want to measure and what will really move the business forward. So when children are born, they can't recognize their parents' faces. And in about 6 months, I don't know if any of you have had kids, but all of a sudden, about 5 months actually, you start staring at your baby and they recognize you, and it's an amazing thing, right? I remember it with my kids, and it was really cool. We learn language. So we learn to, our sensory input we learn from. We don't see colors naturally. You actually have to learn what the different colors are. So we look at data and we expect to understand it immediately, but data is just like any other sense. It takes a little while for you to understand how to look at stuff. And so data people are good at this. They've been doing it for a while, but the rest of the organization needs help. And so once you've built out some cool measures that actually describe what's happening, then your job as a data person is to actually try to teach people how to see. And you have to be patient. And you've got to realize that your job goes from being the person who delivers reports and queries to the person who's teaching the organization. So you've got to become a teacher. And we've seen this and lots of different techniques work between bringing people into the data team and then putting them back out, which is what Yahoo does, or going into a conference room and throwing up Looker on a TV screen and saying, ask me anything at all. And demonstrating that you can know anything from this interface will inspire people to want to learn it. It's like learning to play a musical instrument. You'll be terrible at it on the first note, but in a few weeks, you can be pretty good at it. Data team also, so the more complicated you build this stuff, the harder it is for people to learn. So when Lucas was talking about editing and cutting out the cruft, you can really build out a bunch of junk fast, but it's really good to edit it and try to make it simple. Remember that what you're building is a way for people to see, so you have to take care in your craft. Operational control over data. If the devil is in the details, and there's definitely gold in the hills, okay? So if you know that in data there are insights that if you can discover what they are, they're going to change your world. And there's a simple technique that you use to do this. The technique basically is to go investigate your outliers. So what you'll do is you'll group by some dimension, and you'll measure the thing. Okay, we'll take the ride-sharing thing again. Okay, what percentage of the rides occurred on time? Okay, we're looking at that, and we're looking at it by hour, and we notice that in this there's an outlier here. Well, we can then start dimensionalizing that by other things. Well, we can look at it by driver, or by neighborhood, or by we can go into that. We can go into that half hour and filter on it, and then look at it by neighborhood and see if there's something that happened really bad in one area. Well, maybe the roads were closed in an area, then you find that, and you go, well, we didn't. Maybe we need to figure out how to route around this. But by isolating and diving into the row level detail is where you'll find where you'll find the value and where you'll find out what's really going on. So aggregation helps you look at stuff in general, and then looking at row by row detail actually tells you what's occurring. And I'm going to tell you another story. So there's a hotel customer that does hotels for a business, and what they were doing was they had a referral program, which was really cool. That you could get credits towards staying at hotels if you referred people. And the marketing manager was looking at their data, and they built up some facts. One of the facts they built out was the lifetime number of times they used the service. How many nights have you stayed? And so they bucketed it, and they ran the report that way going down. And then they ran across the top, bucketed by the number of people they had actually referred into the service. So they had this really cool grid, right? And so it's kind of like a heat map and different numbers all over the place. But up in the upper right-hand corner, there was a big number relative to the rest of the numbers. And they were like, what the heck's going on here? Why are people who've never used our service referring lots of people? Why would that happen? And they're like, we're getting gamed. This is bad. So they click in on it, and of course it gives them a list of email addresses because they're using Looker. And they go, well, I see a bunch of email addresses. I don't see anything common about the email addresses. They're from Gmail, they're from Yahoo, they're from all over the place. So the marketing manager is not an engineer. The marketing manager is not afraid of picking up the phone or dropping it or writing some emails. And so she fires off a couple of emails and says, well, why are you using our service? Why are you referring all of these people? You know, and the answers come back, well, I'm a taxi driver. I'm an airline stewardess. I'm a bartender. I get asked the question, where should I stay tonight? Okay, and so they're referring people to the service. And so the marketing manager goes, gold, right? I can market directly to these people. I can find a channel of these people and market to them directly and actually increase my reach. And I can do it much cheaper than doing a general referral program. Pretty brilliant, right? But gold, right there. One of the other great things about building a data-driven culture is that you build data into every place you are. So if you have data if you're pointing at, if you've got a list of users, you should be able to do everything that you can do with a user. So you can see them in Salesforce or in Zendesk or in your system of records, or you should be able to jump to those places. And then consequently also in your other systems, like we saw earlier tonight, in Salesforce, you should be able to see all of that data displayed in whatever tool you're in using embedding. And so taking the time to build out data so that it's where you are, and when you see it, it's where you want to go, gives you the same linking experience that the web does. And it gives you this click-through view of the world that's pretty amazing. And the last part about this is that all of this happens because you have the ability to do transforms. You bring the data into the warehouse like Luke was talking about, and then you transform it into a more useful form. And here's a list of really cool transforms that you might want to do. So sequencing is like a first-level transactional transform. Is this the customer's first, second, third, fourth, or fifth order? If you put that on orders, you can say, well, how many orders today? What percentage of orders today were first orders? You can measure that. It's a very simple transform. You can build that. The fact table, this is like customer lifetime value, customer lifetime number of orders. Another really easy transform, you build it in, and then it becomes part of the way that you look at your world. And there are all kinds of, these are essentially Looker blocks that are available of how you can do the transforms. You start simple, but then you can actually do all kinds of things like co-occurrence, which is what did people buy together, or retention analysis if you're in a subscription model, or funnel, which was asked earlier. If you've got customers interacting on lots of levels, like emails and transactions, you can combine them all into a single view, and so that you can have one view of what a customer has done. You won't get here overnight. It's patience. This seems overwhelming, but what happens is that you just start giving it to people, teaching them, listening, figuring out what you really want to measure, and you'll end up delivering great value, and you'll have a data-driven culture. So Mike and I are going to answer any questions.
So you were talking about creating a data-driven culture or a data culture. If you were starting perhaps before, or the beginning point of where Reed was before they started their journey, what would you do first? What's the first thing you do to start going on that journey?
Well, the first is to get your data into a place where you can actually look at it. And then pick a use case. Don't try to boil the ocean, but pick something that you want to improve in your business and figure out what you need to measure for that, and start a project that is focused on adding one piece of value. And then involve the business people with that.
Yeah, I think that for also very large organizations, embedding data people directly into those teams really helps, because you're also spreading the knowledge of like the lore of like what can you do with data, how is our data connected to each other, or how do we collect it, how do we change that, and that just spreads it across the organization, because anyone could be data driven.
So you mentioned earlier that being data-driven is really important, and I think oftentimes for someone making an argument in an organization why it is important, it's hard to put a rate of return behind it. So I thought one thing that would be really interesting to ask you is, you work with hundreds of startups. And we know that in the Valley or anywhere else in the world, the failure rate of startups is very high. I think about 9 out of 10 fail. So one thing that I notice with my clients, companies that are very data-driven and want to be data-driven, they tend to not fail. So I was wondering, out of your hundreds of startup customers, how many have failed? Is it 9 out of 10? Or is it, no. Because they're data-driven. So, I think this would be a really good argument to use for, this is why we should be data-driven. Look at this.
Yeah, I looked at our 2013 companies as a cohort, and looked at the companies that bought versus the companies that didn't buy in 2013, and it was pretty amazing. The cohort from 2013, there were 11 unicorns out of 70 something companies that bought. There were 11 unicorns, and the fundraise rate was tremendously higher than the rest of the rest of the cohort. So it was pretty amazing. It's a powerful thing. It's actually difficult to quantify because it's not, you don't really get to do an A/B test, but it's pretty amazing to see the growth.
Yeah.
Hi. Can you give me some actionable insight of how to transform people who is more vanity focused to a more real focus?
You have to deliver the grades. Okay, you have nobody. There were a couple of schools that said that they weren't going to do grades, right? But eventually, all of the schools want grades because they need to be able to compare students, and so you're going to end up having to you're going to have to implement the daily active users because somebody who wants to compare your company to another company cares about it, but it's not what you should focus on internally. And if you bring a couple of wins to your C staff, your C-level staff, with insights that are not using those measures, they'll change their minds.
So for a lot of our customers, as we implement them, they'll start off with the vanity metrics because it's we already have these. We have to have them in Looker too. But the thing that we see start happening is the reporting teams will start giving people small applications in Looker to start answering their own questions. And they just go off and try to find ways to win themselves. And that overturns the vanity because you have people who are using data to make your company more competitive than everyone else. I mean, that's huge.
Well, it's the win chain. So we work with our philosophy is to work with our customers to help them win. And the data people in the companies that we work with the people in their companies to make those individuals in the companies win. And because those people in the company, it's like the marketing manager at the hotel company finds ways of making the company win, then the whole, it's a nice giant win chain.
So we've seen some examples of historical analytics, real-time analytics, and a nod towards predictive analytics. Do you have any examples of predictions that you've made at Looker using your tool that you could share with us today?
Yeah, so we have table calcs, and there's some pretty wild things that some of our customers in San Francisco are doing in terms of forecasting, figuring out from our financial tables, where will we be if we maintain this trajectory. We also have this JavaScript visualization, custom visualization plugin area in the application. And you can use that to make calls out to an R server or a Panda server, and it can do some crazy things and feed it back into Looker too.
So one of the transformations that one of our clients did was to take a bunch of variables from a Looker model to be the API, feed it in. They were looking to figure out likelihood of close, do some machine learning on that, or actually do some regression analysis, and then feed that data back in as a table with customer ID and % likelihood to close. And then that becomes another attribute that you can use in your model. So it's a prediction, but it's just another attribute.
So I think Looker's done a really good job of moving us culturally forward with the BI tool, the agile principles, etc. But it's still quite tied to a structured form of data. Obviously, we have NoSQL databases and the explosion of sort of schemaless development. What does the future look like, or are you guys planning and looking at that or addressing that need?
Sure. So BigQuery actually stores, their tables can be arbitrarily deep nested structures, and we handle that very well. So we've made extensions to the LookML language to be able to handle all kinds of nested objects and do the appropriate calculations whenever you're doing sums or averages or on any of the sublayers and counting objects. You just model it and it just works, and it's great.
Yeah. So for Looker, like we don't discriminate against the underlying database, and if the database really excels at unstructured unstructured data types, like for example, Snowflake, they have a variant data type, and it'll shard your JSON properties and however nested it is, and you don't have to worry about constructing the relational schema. You just dump it in, and you can make calls out to the properties at any level. And it's all indexed. It's all like, they have some magical metadata store that takes care of it. And there's databases that deal with unstructured data sets better than others, and we work with those. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, that's a good segue. I know it's public information that the actual largest BigQuery user in the world is Snapchat, and they're using Looker on top of Snapchat. So Lloyd can answer any questions about that at the cocktail hour. So this is probably also the most important part of the evening, enjoying networking with all your peers and comrades here. So thank you all for coming.
Thanks.